Today we will have a discussion about past the Silicon Valley towards a European digital public sphere. So this is immediately connected to our global topic of this conference, but it has also some specific aspects to our common goal at the Käte Hamburger colleague for a better understanding of the possibilities and limits of transboundary cooperation. I think the digital sphere is completely under-researched until now, so we have to do something about this. I'm not Christoph Bieber, as announced. He had a little accident, so small causes, big effects. He was bitten by a mosquito, and now his eye is like that. So I replace him. The disadvantage is there's an expert missing here as the moderator. The advantage is, so there is an idiot, an amateur speaking to you because I have no clue and I have 3 questions. Very simple questions Christoph would never have asked. Number 1, what is digital? Number 2, what is digitalization? And number 3, most important, what is digital Europe then? So these are the simple questions I have to our speakers. And the speakers are, we start with Emmanuel Allois. He is a research leader at the School for Humanities and Social Sciences in St. Gallen. He speaks at least 10 languages, and he will talk in English tonight, and he will start the conversation. He will be followed by Jean-Baptiste Souffrant. He's an IT lawyer. He is the former General Secretary of the French Digital Council, and he has a very interesting opinion about the headline of our talk, Past the Silicon Valley, you will see. And then we have 2 very interesting respondents here. First is Constanze Kurz. She is, I would say, the most outstanding hacker in Germany, and this is serious. She is a hacker, and hacker is nothing criminal. It's very good that we have them. She is a speaker of the Chaos Computer Club. I think one of the most interesting, I would say, an NGO for digital affairs. And she's, of course, a computer scientist, and she knows exactly what we're talking about. And last but not least, Dirk Messner. He is the co-director of the Käte Hamburger Kolleg and the director of one of the most important think tanks in Europe and the world, the German Development Institute in Bonn. Very much involved in digital affairs, now also as a co-chairman of the Wissenschaftliche Beirat der Bundesregierung Globale Umweltveränderung, the Advisory Council for the Federal Government of Global Change, and digitalization is exactly one of the topics. So this is it, what I had to say. We start with the presentation of Emmanuel Allois, and this will be about 20 minutes, 20 minutes to Jean-Baptiste, and then 10 minutes respondents, and then the floor is open for your questions and remarks. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm Emmanuel.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm pretty much sure and I'm pretty much certain that I'm not going to be able to ask these and respond to these 3 seemingly simple questions in any adequate way, but you will judge at the end, and I hope we will have a common conversation about this towards the end. So let me start right away. In a metaphorical equation that was to become famous, Lenin once said that communism consists in the Soviets plus electricity. And this famous metaphor could be rephrased as follows. Revolutionary changes might well be about radical change of the mindsets of ideas, but they will remain unsuccessful as long as they can't be materialized in some form. Politics is nothing without an orchestration of the material and technical condition of its emergence. And I guess something analogous could be said about the public sphere in Europe. For all too long, I believe we have bemoaned the lack of a consistent European ideal, which is not only dependent on the creation of a single market, but leaving aside the fact that there can be no European polity without physical and communicational architectures that would allow it to rise. And exactly therein, I believe, lies the rub in the current discussion about Europe, and more specifically about the construction of a European digital public sphere, or digital Europe, as Klaus Leggevi put it. All too hurriedly, we have bought into the idea that the digital world would be a world without boundaries, which would allow to finally put into practice the promises the very idea of a public sphere yielded. And in fact, much seemed indeed to hint at the fact that the internet meets the best part of the requirements that normative theories of the public sphere, such as Jürgen Habermas' concept of Öffentlichkeit, had set up. As a matter of fact, the internet, which is critical blogosphere, could claim to be universal, radically decentral, bottom-up, participatory, as well as meritocratic, rather than being dependent on the respective social status. The authority of a net participant seems to rest on the unforced force of the better argument. Zwanglose Zwang des besseren Arguments. And what follows, I'd like to contest that the internet is the epitome of a public sphere and argue why there is not such a thing as a neutrality of the net. And the first step towards a European public sphere would be to stop thinking that we need to create alternative media standards or applications. The Silicon Valley ideology has won whenever we believe that messages can be dissociated from their media, from the medium. But before getting there, what must be clarified is how the idea of the digital sphere as an ideal speech situation became a consensual commonplace. Is this for me? So by and large, discussions about the European public sphere seem to be struck by a symptomatic form of schizophrenia. While politics sees itself restricted to matters of content, the form and the infrastructure of the political space itself are held to be impartial and hence not subject to discussion. The pervasive rhetoric of participation and inclusion seems to presuppose that the stage is all set, and it's all perfect, and all we need to do is have more participants coming here on the stage and participate in this play staged on scene. I will try to argue that exclusions do not only take place on the level of who speaks on the stage, but also on how the stage allows only for certain forms of expressions to be articulated on it, leaving many others out. So the communicational architectures themselves are far from being hospitable to all means of articulating oneself. And the metaphors we live by today in digital age are dangerously misleading, as metaphors such as the cloud or ubiquitous computing all seem to suggest that data is freely floating around at no cost. And the discourse of the internet providers equally deceptive. Whoever provides the internet provides much more than just cable wires. The internet provider provides the very topography any virtual space may take. Whoever codes the way we negotiate our shared existences and deliberate about the use of the commons already heavily interferes in these procedures. And as Lawrence Lessing fittingly put this, code is law, and the code makers have to become our new lawmakers, whether we like it or not. All of this is of global relevance. After all, we're here in the global cooperation research, but it is even more topical for the European context. We still haven't realized to a sufficient degree how matters of building something like a European commonality is not just a war over content. To believe that form and content can be separated testifies to a kind of late modern Marcionite faith. Many still believe that cultural wars were only wars about ideas. Think of the Cold Wars. We all know the story about the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan came with clear conditions. The American money would be paid only if European nations would lower their quotas of cultural products that would be imported. So this is how Europe became flooded by American cultural products. All of this is very well known. But we believe that all of this is just a matter of superstructure, as it was described in Marxist conceptions. And I think we're wrong here because the technological infrastructures themselves and the legal frameworks that accompany it are generally left uncommented, and just confirming one more time, if need be, that in some sort of Pauline dualism, Europe prefers disregarding the letter and focusing on the spirit. Again, many people complain about the lack of something like a common European demos. Of course, you know the Maastricht Treaty 1992, Article 8, declared that there is something like European citizenship, and many consider that this is just a void declaration of intent, and we need to create the demos. But I think all of this is, again, starting too late. A brief look at the history of the emergence of a critical public immediately pinpoints to the importance of specific meeting places such as Tischgesellschaften in Germany, salons in France, or coffee houses in England, Austria, spreading radically novel and unheard of ideas and aggregating individuals of diverse background. But moreover, these historical inquiries prove the significance of material communication networks and institutions such as journals and gazettes, which could connect actors throughout the continent. So in some cases, these institutions fostered the emergence of a public sphere, although their very form thoroughly contradicted the requirements the discourse ethics set up for an ideal speech situation. So just to mention two elements here, think of the many early modern salons amounted to meeting of secret societies, importance of Freemasonry needs to be stressed, in strengthening progressive ideas, and the correspondance littéraire around Grimm and Diderot published unsigned contributions and reviews which were sent to subscribers who were themselves protected by anonymity. Now, secrecy and anonymity can hardly be said to stand up the demands of accountability and transparency that surround the public sphere. So I think when we talk about the history of the structural transformation of the public sphere, we can't do this without writing the history of its infrastructural transformations. Everybody seems to agree today that the concept of public sphere, such as it was theorized by Habermas, is idealized. Idealized because it is exclusive. It leaves out women, it neglects the interests of subaltern groups, as well as more generally, Oskar Negt and Alexander Kluge already underscored this early on. It misses out the plebeian social strata that might not feel at ease in such a bourgeois conception of public debate. So for sure, the conception of a unified, homogeneous and power-free public sphere is idealized insofar as it remains blind for its own mechanisms of inclusion, and the idea of a consensus-based public sphere thus permanently masks its own structural asymmetries. The power-free relations that the Habermasian ethics seem to establish by proclaiming a space of communicative equality came at the expense of those who do not know how to express themselves according to the rules of the game. Now, if you talk to Habermasians, contemporary Habermasians today, they will say, okay, all of this, we agree, this universalist idea was idealized, but we can keep one thing, and that's the distinction between a strategic use of communication, instrumental use of communication, and a cooperative or communicative use of communication. The problem is that when we have a look at how the net works today, we will find out that the data streams can't be distinguished in strategic and non-strategic uses of communication. Most of the data exchange is not communicative at all. Rather, it would be more appropriate to characterize these data exchanges as meaningless, deeply meaningless. And this leads me to what I call the computational approach to communication. Most of what happens in communicational systems today is data exchange, of which only an infinitely small portion is directly relevant at all for human purposes. So today, if you ask analysts working on big data, they predict that the digital universe is doubling in size around every 2 years, and an ever bigger portion of these huge data volumes will be generated by the Internet of Things. So you all know this idea of the sensors, objects that are filled with sensors, smartphone cameras, CCTV footage, geo-positioning, embedded devices, biomedical indicators, self-tracking devices. So the Internet of Things is very likely to generate a permanent output of data, let alone the attached strings of metadata. And not only are all these kinds of data circumventing human actors, since they will consist in machine-to-machine interaction, but the very meaning of the data communication cannot be yet fully anticipated. That's, of course, the idea. We are creating all this data. Maybe one day we can use them by combining and synthesizing them. Today, less than 1% of the collected data is currently analyzed at all. But in retrospect, of course, we can find out that this data mining was actually producing maybe a new resource that is comparable to the resource that oil was in 20th century. To imagine that data collection is not necessarily done in a purposeful manner is in no way specific to big data. That's a specifics of data in general. Data doesn't have to be meaningful. On the contrary, its efficiency precisely rests upon a disjunction of form and content, of syntax and semantics. And in itself, the disjunction has a long-standing history, and it harks back to the beginnings of communication theory. Claude Shannon's mathematical theory of communication from 1948, considered by many as the founding document of the electronic age, effectively consecrates the disjunction of syntax and semantics. I quote Shannon, "The fundamental problem of communication is that of reproducing at one point, either exactly or approximately, a message selected at another point." I'm not sure he could have a meaningful conversation with Jürgen Habermas. The fundamental problem then is that frequently the messages have meaning, he concedes. But that's not an issue here, because for the engineer, the only question is how this message can be brought about in a transparent way. So the transparency of the medium is of the essence here. As he concludes in a sentence that speaks for itself, these semantic aspects of communication are irrelevant to the engineering problem. This sentence summarizes everything I would like to tell you tonight. These semantic aspects of communications are irrelevant to the engineering problem. Techno-skeptical, if not openly technophobic positions have a walkover denouncing this reductionist conception of communication, and it has been argued that it mistakes information for communication, that the sender-receiver model is far too simple to describe informational networks, or that it disregards the importance of semantics in the digital world. And moreover, it has been claimed that this purely engineering-oriented perspective promotes a general cybernetization of the world. All of these criticisms make a point, for sure. But I think the dismissal of this Shannon-Weaverian position is wrong. Why? Because Shannon and Weaver identified the very structure of a disjunction that is still operative in our world today. As long as we don't understand that the disjunction has a deeply emancipatory promise. It yields an emancipatory promise. As long as we don't understand this emancipatory promise and the connections it features to progressive ideals, we will remain blind to the current dominance of what I propose to call the Silicon Valley ideology. So, what's the Silicon Valley ideology? I believe that the Silicon Valley ideology represents, embodies a very specific form of or interpretation of a deep-rooted modernist ideas. And some of the elements of its credo can be summarized as follows. Centralized hierarchies are rejected to the benefit of horizontal relationships. The metaphor of the network replaces that of the vertical pyramid. The principle of legitimacy shifts towards a principle of creativity. But among all these features, arguably the most important one is that of equality. And to this, we haven't paid sufficiently attention. In this siliconized universe, everything, and that extends also to everyone, is treated on equal footing. We cannot grasp the attractiveness of this Californian conception if we miss out this crucial aspect. Max Weber, talked of the Protestant spirit of early modern capitalism. Today, we could probably speak of the egalitarian spirit of dataism. And the specifics of this egalitarianism lie in its negative characterization. Accommodating everything becomes possible not by an inclusive move which makes space for singularities, but on the contrary, by disregarding individuality and contextuality. In other words, the algorithm creates a situation of general equivalence which allows for each and everything to be taken into account. In modernity, this disregard for the background, for social extraction, or for symbolic distinctions had a pivotal role in the social progress and led to conquests of important civil rights. But today, the algorithm has absorbed and incorporated this egalitarian move, while all the same giving it a peculiar inflection. Treating everything on equal footing is tantamount to a form of indifference. To the algorithm, it is indifferent what kind of objects it processes, whether organic flows, movements of organic matter, living or mechanical entities. No hierarchy is introduced. What happens is a breaking down of this continuous flow into finite discrete elements, and they become part of a huge universe of calculable objects. So that would be the answer to the question, what is digitization? There is no digitality, I claim. There is only digitization. It's a process. There is no such a thing as digitality as such. There are operations of digitization. Digitization produces a form of universal equivalence. For everything to be of equal value, the algorithm needs to disregard the meaning. In this sense, Shannon and Weaver were right in stressing that the question of meaning is irrelevant. The efficiency of the algorithm is directly dependent on its referential blindness. We might now say, but this doesn't really come as a big surprise, and it weren't maybe so much of a problem either if the mechanisms undergirding this process weren't subject to a concomitant denial, which justifies talking of an ideological structure. Per definition, ideologies are constricting frames that deny their very constricting nature. The imposition of a unified standard, itself the condition of possibility of the subsequent general equivalence, consists in a formatting that at the very same time denies the importance of the format. As it were, the Silicon Valley ideology promotes an ideal of liberality which permanently disavows its own formatting procedures. Let me give some examples to tell you or try to illustrate you what I mean by that. One example would be the discourse around platform governance. You might know Tim O'Reilly, the inventor of the concept of Web 2.0 and the popularizer of the notion of open source. Some call them the oracle of the Silicon Valley. He launched an initiative which has received wide attention these last years, and it consists in applying the model of platform economies to political issues of governance. Under the general tag government as platform, the aim is to fight the skepticism towards political elites by reducing the task of the government to solely providing an infrastructure, itself totally neutral, for deliberation and civil self-governance. In and of itself, governments should refrain from any interventions and concentrate on just ensuring the basis for a rational communicative exchange, which would involve open data feedback and other forms of algorithmic regulation. The degree of hypocrisy is stunning here. This discourse extends an asserted disconnect between the platform and the actions it allows to the political realm, all the while denying the political nature of such a move, something we know from bureaucratic regimes that pretend to be themselves unpolitical. Tim O'Reilly's initiative is just one of the many prominent among those that are currently submitted for consideration also in Europe. We know the fascination of many governments and municipalities by the possibilities of relying on open data for managing the public space. All of this done in the name of smartification of cities. So, for example, we see the rise of public-private partnerships in the improving of circulation and traffic in the public space. So companies such as Uber and other taxi services offer to freely provide the data they collect in order to improve circulation, traffic lights management, to avoid traffic jams. Of course, we can say it is of a common interest of municipalities, public services, and of Uber to avoid traffic jams in cities. But I'm not sure that this same data that Uber provides the municipalities with is going to give some evidence that we need, for example, more cycle paths in the public space. Let's just restate this once again. The digital world is not inherently liberating. Freedom is not per se part of its genetic code. Another indicative case I could mention here is the initiative Internetorg. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. So in 2013, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, had this idea: we need to promote democracy by providing developing countries with a functioning internet. That is going to be the basis for real, true democracy. A free internet, and was later then rechristened free basics, by the way. What do they mean by free basics? It's a bouquet of 17 services, applications, that are then provided to countries in East Africa, such as Tanzania and Kenya. It was introduced, and then especially India, which was to be the big testing case, where also remote rural areas should have access to the internet and then fully access full-blown democracy finally. The problem is only that among these 17 applications, only one was non-commercial, and that was Wikipedia. All the other ones were commercial applications, such as Facebook. So reduced internet, free basics, and these basics are commercial services. The good news is that even the Indian Regulation Authority realized this, and there was a big debate in India, and it rejected the offer that Facebook made. But this has not been followed by other regulation authorities in Africa at all. So billion of potential African users today are providing significant personal data in exchange of a very heavily restricted internet access. We can laugh about these cases and believe that we're better off in Europe because we have the European Union and a very involved and engaged defender of these kind of consumer rights. We really believe in this. I think we should be more skeptical about this. So when we see the attempt of building alternative European databases and networks, this might seem a first step. But ultimately, I believe it doesn't even matter whether the infrastructures used have been devised in California, China, or in continental Europe. As long as we take over this initial disjunction between the medium and the message, between the infrastructure and the superstructure, so to speak, we're just continuing this colonization of the commons by an idea that comes from the Silicon Valley ideology. What is striking is how blind we've become to our own European tradition. We should know the experiences in setting up European media channels should have warned us. Media contents cannot simply be translated from language into another without altering their meaning and their cultural and effective connotations. So what is striking in the current debate, and I'm really coming to a close now, about European data sovereignty, where European commissioners see it as their responsibility to securing data privacy to all European citizens, is that, again, the only thing that is taken into account is the individual perspective and the concomitant private rights. In an age of mass surveillance, of course. But I think the real urgent matter is to rethink, what about those commons? The management of the commons is the beginning of any political entity. It's how to relate to the use of woods, of pasture lands, etc., etc. What do we do with these commons today? Can we think of something like digital commons in the 21st century? And I believe that the project that Spinoza had in the 17th century to writing an ethics more geometrico has to be now transformed into an ethics more silico. And just one last thing, one thing that machines definitely can't do because of their indifference is judgment. The machines don't judge us. They can acknowledge us and register us in other ways, but they need, what they don't have is judgment. This might be good news, but the other good news is that we still have this capacity of judgment, and this is maybe something we should remind ourselves of today. This faculty of judgment is of crucial importance, capacity of playing out a collective faculty of judgment, this judgment that machines lack, just as they lack the kind of dynamics St. Augustine used to call the libido sciendi, the desire to know. And I think these are things that we have to recapture today in this critical task of building a European digital public sphere.
So when I saw that the question of today was past Silicon Valley, I was immediately interested, because I really think this is one of the first time I've seen European thinkers and people interested in the European movement trying to put a finger at Silicon Valley as a political movement in itself. And it's also the first time I've seen them trying to understand that we need to move past this. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not something you will see in the media. Just a few days ago, I was discussing with French thinkers about Silicon Valley, and they were lamenting that all of the public debate on digital issues is only and always discussed from the point of view of Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley thinkers. And when I say thinkers, I am being nice. I want to say Silicon Valley people being paid to write stuff and say stuff on TV and in media. Not people who, not academics, most of them, not even people trying to have a real debate on these issues. Why? The thing is, why do we think it's an important question today? Because, well, Silicon Valley is seen as a model everywhere. If you have teens, you know that they grow up with Silicon Valley tools and Silicon Valley ideas. In some way, I even tend to think today that tools like Snapchat, for example, will change the spirituality of many teens who will grow with that today. It will change the ways they see the human body. It will change the ways they see their relationship one to each other. And why do we perceive that as a problem? It could be a good thing. It could be nice. But it's not, because at the same time, more and more people love Google. More and more people reject Facebook. Discussions on Facebook are not discussions anymore. It used to be a nice place with a few of your friends. As of today, it's a place of hate. And it's not debates you will have there. It's aggressive discussions, even with your friends. For me, for example, I don't share anything more on Facebook. I don't share anything except pictures and music anymore. And you will see that more and more people will come to that, because you don't want to get into fights with people all the time. And that's actually what they make their money from, because the more fights, the longer you stay on the website, and the more money they make. And the thing is, it's not just an economic model. It's a project. It's a society project. It derives from an ideology, and Emmanuel was right about that. I think it's a movement, a political movement, a digital movement, maybe we can call it if you want, but we don't like it. And the EU institutions and a lot of European countries have been fighting it for, I think, 15, 20 years now, with various successes and failures. We had recently a few successes, like, for example, the new privacy regulations, which were adopted, we don't know how. Very simply, actually. It was not that difficult to change the rules, but it was surprising. The idea that we'll have now data portability and algorithm transparency is totally new. It means that you will be able to ask to Google its algorithm. It passed, it was voted, and it will apply from next year on. But the problem is that even if we have these kind of successes, it's more complicated today, and still we have kind of an, I would say, an epistemological ambiguity between the expressed goals of the Silicon Valley and the reality of its realizations. We tend to take what they say for more than what it's worth. And the result is that, well, it's complicated to know why we do that. Maybe it's just because we think they are young. Maybe we think it's a new movement. It's something nice and small that will change with time. And we tend to overlook them, which means we are both complacent and maybe arrogant. Some countries are not, others are a little bit. But Europeans are especially naive about the Silicon Valley ambitions. The thing that struck me when I prepared for this seminar is that I've been thinking about the roots of the thinking of Silicon Valley. I've been searching on it for a long time. And mostly people stop at 1968. 1968 was a year, at the end, it was, I think it was December 12 or something like that, when an event happened in Palo Alto that was called the Mother of Demo. If you don't know the Mother of Demo, have a look for it on Google. Go watch it on YouTube. It's incredible. It was done nearly 50 years ago, and what you will see is a guy on a screen having a video conf with some other guy far away, opening a window, chatting with him, exchanging with him with audio and video, opening some sort of Word thing in order to type text and so on, clicking on links and everything. And it works better than what you have in your computers today, which is very strange. Like, really, this is not a joke. I was invited at another seminar like 3 weeks ago, and they tried to make a connection with some other speaker who was abroad, and they were not able to have Skype working. So it didn't work. They just had the audio. But in 1968, they had crisp, clear video and audio and text, and everything was working super fine. And it was really the technology. When people think we are in front of a technological revolution, I'm sorry, I don't see where is the technology, because it was already the new technology, because it was already there in 1968. And so most people stop at that, and they say that the Silicon Valley was created around that time, but actually it's not. When you try to understand, well, one guy who has been trying to go to the roots of the Silicon Valley ideology or the digital movement is called Fred Turner. Maybe some of you have been reading Fred Turner. Well, basically the theory of Fred Turner is that in San Francisco, the military met with the hippies. And together they took LSD, and well, boom, Silicon Valley. And actually, it's not true. And when you look at it, I think it's a nice way, it's a nice story. Of course, partly of it, it's true, but it doesn't get to the root of the problem. Same thing, if you look at another guy who tried to understand the roots of the Silicon Valley, well, you have Stephen Levi. Stephen Levi wrote a great book in the 80s called The Hackers of Silicon Valley. It's where he invented the garage. Have you heard about the garage? Every startup began in a garage. HP began in a garage. Apple began in a garage. Google began in a laboratory, in a research center, publicly funded with, well, that doesn't work for Google. There was no garage, not even for one of these companies. Even HP didn't begin in a garage. But it's a nice story to tell, and they don't stop at telling stories when they need to justify their existence. So it's also a myth, and honestly, this has been debunked by people for like maybe 10 or 15 years, by people like, maybe you know Marilyn Mazzucato? Marilyn Mazzucato, she wrote a huge book on how the Californian state funded Silicon Valley startups and helped them to get money and to grow. So really, it's a private-public enterprise. It's not simple. But if you want to go to the real roots of Silicon Valley, the very surprising thing is the link. And it's actually very explanatory, because where is the link between hippies and transhumanism? Where is the link between, I don't know, hippies and talents, that look for talents? And well, when you look at the roots of Silicon Valley before the 50s, before the 60s, you will find eugenists and industrialists. And people have forgotten that, but in the US at that time, you had thousands of people being sterilized because they were not fit enough for society. And that was especially active in California. And in California, you had research labs dedicated to the eugenist movement. And the funny thing is that one of the main students of this lab, and especially the main lab in California, was Claude Shannon, whom Emmanuel talked about just before. Claude Shannon was actually trying to implement Mendel ideas and modernize them by using more modern solutions than the way it was being done at the time. He was working in a eugenist lab. Then arrived a guy who's called Vannevar Bush. I don't know if you've heard about Vannevar Bush, but Vannevar Bush is famous because he wrote a text that inspired the mother of demo. He wrote in 1946 a text which is called As We May Think. It was published in Time. It was read by the head of the Palo Alto laboratory who organized the mother of demo in 1968, and it's really said to be the basics of, he describes in text, in writing, not as a demo, the way we will digitize everything, click on links, and replace our memory step by step. And then Vannevar Bush became the director of the eugenist laboratory where Claude Shannon was working. And he changed the name in 1938, just before the war, because, of course, at that time, the eugenist movement were getting a bad press from the Nazi eugenist movement at the time. And he changed it from eugenist to genetics. And Claude Shannon became a researcher specialized in digitization and genetics. He went to work for the MIT, where he went on working and developing his ideas. But he was not the only one. Turing was also, well, when you speak about Turing to historians and people who have been really deep into his work, they will tell you he's maybe more a biologist than actually a computer scientist. He wrote paper, he was the first one to actually see the brain as a mass of electrical signals and to try to understand it as a computer instead of as like a biological machine. And that's when you go back to these roots, that you understand that they have not been broken at no point. And nobody has ever, that's where you begin to understand the insistence of transhumanism today, the way they focus on talents, as I said, instead of learning, experience, these kind of things. In the Silicon Valley, if you look at the way Peter Thiel sees things, well, you can be talented at 18 or 17. After that, it's finished. It's over. You don't learn over your life. You're great when you begin, but after that, it's finished. The lack of respect for scholarship and academic knowledge, the lack of interest for social justice, public service, equality, are these values that these startups and these companies defend? Never. The focus of money as a measure for success in life, up to the point that recently a French magazine, maybe you know Le Point, a very famous French magazine, they made their cover on the new philosophers of this century, with who? Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and only, well, CEOs. Are they philosophers? They are successful entrepreneurs. They made money. Does it mean that they have the right ideas for our society? I'm not sure. And so when you begin to, and also it's very important, and what is beginning to be understood today is that we now have a few academic studies on the sociological and political point of views of Silicon Valley members. And well, the troubling thing is that they are very far right. Many of them are leaning to the far right. And it's strange as people like are only now beginning to realize it. And when you get into that disenchantment, if I want to, I like Max Weber, and I've always been interested in trying to I don't know how to say that in English, le désenchantement. Well, you understand, you put a new meaning on the motto of the Silicon Valley and of so many startups that they want to change the world. They don't want to change the world, they want to change human beings, they want the betterment of the human race. That's why, if you know Norbert Wiener was, with Claude Shannon, one of the main inventors of the theory of information, and the book where he invented the theory of information is made The Human Use of Human Being, which will bring a new light to Uber, Deliveroo, and many other platforms that we use today to do microtasking and having a lot of people working for no money at all and no respect. And the problem I see, especially in the EU, is that these companies, this ideology, is not just like they're trying to justify itself and its existence. It's actually competing for epistemological authority. It is trying to win arguments and win minds, and it thinks that it is under threat by social democracy. I've understood that myself, like 10 years ago, I think. I had the luck to be in a meeting with Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google at the time. And it was very strange because he was beginning to explain, we were talking about regulation and stuff. And at some point, he stopped and he said, okay, you know what, regulations. Regulations are decided by parliaments, voted by parliament members. But what is a parliament member? As of today, any citizen who has an access to Google is better informed than any parliament member. And we will have access to more of them. So what is the legitimacy of a parliament member to take decisions when we could take better decisions than them? And of course, the first thing to answer him was that, okay, but no citizen will ever be a board member of Google. But still, it was so frank, so honest. And actually, he repeated the argument in his book a few years later. But that it's really important. It's not like to be pessimistic or I don't want to be too dark or something. It's not that. I'm really myself optimistic because I think it's not that difficult for the EU to actually impose regulations, to decide stuff, but you need to want it. And as of today, we don't want it because we have not realized yet that we are competing with them for that epistemological authority in our citizens' minds. It could be a very theoretical problem. Okay, it could be like you could think I'm talking like about like the competition between ideas between the west coast of the US and the EU, but actually it's not. It's really an uphill battle. These companies don't pay their taxes. These companies want to privatize public services. These companies, I was talking about that just before, but maybe it's a good thing. I don't mean that it's always a bad thing, but for example, the postal service is not relevant today. That public service was privatized slowly and calmly for the last 15 years. And as of today, you don't send a letter by mail. You send it by email. It's free. It's not free, actually, but the infrastructure has been subsidized in a way that allowed to leave that public service to private companies now. And nobody complained. Why? Because it's actually working very well, and it's super cheap. So why not? But do we want that for everything? I'm not so sure. And you see with Uber that we don't want that for everything. And the thing is, their impact can be very direct. I talked about the impact on the brain and thoughts of EU citizens who use now platforms and Silicon Valley startups in order to get their news. We all saw what it's creating and how that can be manipulated. But think, for example, I think it's really important to get a few examples. Think about workplace relations. Like two years ago, people were talking about the need for digital transition within organizations. We would have pizzas, hackathons, candies, open spaces. Today, we know that the reality of that is sexual harassment and lack of diversity. And still, we still consider them as models in terms of workplace relations. That needs to stop. I mean, there is a problem there. Same thing for corporate governance. Well, we used to think that we would have cool founders, simplicity, and entrepreneurship as some kind of like coming out of age adventures. But if you look at startups today, it's just like equity capital, the way we used to do it 200 years ago, and speculation, nothing more. They have shareholders and a board of administrators, and there is no place for their stakeholders. They don't allow their employees to be part of their administration. They don't allow their consumers to be part of their administration and board of directors. Is that like modern corporate governance? I don't think so. Something with care, something with public debate. For example, the first time I understood that argument, it was Jonathan Franzen. It happens often that fiction writers see things better than analysts. And Jonathan Franzen, after the Clinton scandal, decided to write a piece on, because everybody was like afraid that the digital startups would threaten the privacy of American citizens the way the Clinton privacy had been invaded. And he said, no, it's not a matter of privacy, it's a matter of public debate. The thing is that today anyone can have any opinion on the internet anytime, and so why not? But you don't know who's actually telling this. Maybe he's just some guy who has no idea about what he's talking about. And thus the public debate will end up being bad. And that's actually what's happening today. And same thing for public space. Well, smart cities. I love smart cities. It's a super good way of telling we need to improve our cities. But you know what smart cities will be in Paris? Well, in Paris, we will have little drones walking the streets and taking pictures of every plate of every car that is not parked the right way. Then why not? But what's the next step? See, we begin with plates, we can go on way further than that. And of course, it's a private-public partnership that will not need a lot of public money to be funded. So, it's not to say that there are not good things. Okay, I've been part of Wikipedia, which is still a not-for-profit, but it's an exception. And it was not created in the Silicon Valley. It was created in Florida by an Englishman. I've been part of free software. Yeah, it's true. And it's a very international movement from the beginning. All right? And it's very decentralized. And I've been part of a lot of free software projects for years, but free software was developed in Harvard, in Boston, by engineers from the MIT, not by people from the Silicon Valley, and these engineers were from Brooklyn originally. So, and most of free software developers, by the way, are Europeans, not Americans. And this only, in my view, like, these problems only stresses the need for European digital public sphere. I totally agree with the title of that seminar. With European values in mind, of course. The trouble is that today, people think that the future is Blade Runner 2049. It's not. Blade Runner 2049 is just lip service to these companies, and I think Philip K. Dick would have been horrified at the way, it's being sponsored by Google. I don't see how Philip K. Dick would have liked that. No, if you want to understand the future, you need to look at Neuromancer, the book from William Gibson. Everybody has the chip in his head. Corporations are everywhere. Governments are nowhere. There are no elections. And people are being dictated what they do. And we have very rigid class system where the people who are born the right way actually have access to stuff and the others don't. Why not? That's the way Silicon Valley sees things. So just to conclude, how would I say that? It's important to keep in mind that the problem is very real. Maybe just one last example. Maybe you remember the James Damore memo. James Damore, a Google employee who published a memo last summer where he tried to explain why Google had so few female employees. Well, it's because they are biologically inferior, and they can't work as much as men, they get pregnant, and they are not as smart anyway. That's the way he explained it. And he said he got fired for that. But he didn't get fired because he was wrong. He got fired because he published it just in the middle of a scandal about sexual harassment issues in the Silicon Valley. And you have had many voices in the Valley explaining that this guy was actually right to raise the issue of the differences between men and women, and that maybe he had a right to free speech and he should not be fired for that. Well, maybe not. But at the end of the day, it tells a lot. I mean, instead of looking at the way Silicon Valley speaks of itself and describes itself as like a very positive venture with really dedicated people wanting the betterment of society, we need to check at the reality of it. We need to look at it. We cannot take it for face value. And we cannot allow ourselves to be only convinced by the apparent culture of simplicity and efficiency. I mean, the trouble is that it's European and democratic values that are threatened and need to be defended. On the positive side, I don't think things are settled at all. The fight is not over at all. In the EU, as I said, we had victories. And you can look at China and Russia for alternative models if you want. I don't think it's maybe not the right models for us. But you can also have a look at Japan and Korea, who are democracies, and that actually succeeded in avoiding to be a Silicon Valley colony. The way it goes, I think we won't avoid soon. Probably, like, I would bet that in 5 to 10 years, we will begin to have a talk about the way these companies will need to be broken down. And probably, how do you say in English? I don't know, like functional separation, something like that. They used to do that for AT&T. Well, at some point, there will be a need to think if it's not necessary to do the same thing in Europe. And given that most of their business model rely on European citizens, I think we'll have our say, and I'm not afraid. Voilà.
Thank you very much for two very inspiring presentations. Well, we had these dystopian moments in both presentations, but we had a lot of, let's say, hints for the European digital sphere. We were talking about regulation, we were talking about the digital commons, we were talking about the faculty of judgment, which I found very interesting. We were talking about examples like Wikipedia, we were talking about stakeholder participation and about the avoidance of cartels in this business. So I would like to give Constanze first the mic for a response. Here's your mic.
Well, that's quite hard for me because I, especially for the last talk, I disagree with almost every sentence. So we will have a hard discussion here because the underlying fear of algorithms and many of the facts we were presented, I disagree strongly. It's maybe my point of view of the world because I look more on the technology side, but I very much agree with almost everything that being said, so it's maybe a good discussion. Let's start with something. I don't think that that we are that much dependent on the Silicon Valley companies, as most people think here in Europe and even think in the United States. I think technology is an open process and we can pick alternatives. And looking at the 4-year Snowden, as we talked about, as I've been to Gießen, a lot has changed in the last 4 years, and these are only 4 years. Meaning that I don't think we have that, we should have that deterministic view on the technology future. That said, there's maybe a second example which I want to refer to, which came in the last talk about the open space movement, the hackathons, the hacker spaces, and all that alternative and decentralized ideas which we had and tried to combine with academic research, and that is all gone now in a way that I heard. And what I see is that it's thriving all over the world, not only in Europe, but also in the US and in Southern American countries and even in Asia. So I see a different kind of movement which is not that much connected to the data-driven economy which is quite important right now.
So I'm chairing the German Advisory Council on Global Change. So my background is being a social science-based sustainability researcher, and working together with earth scientists. This is my background. And currently in this council we are working on a comprehensive study on sustainability in the digital age. So we need to understand how the digital age looks like. I'm just coming out of a meeting with the government representatives of all ministries in the field of digitalization. And we talked about the digital world and sustainability challenges, and my memory is still fresh because their reaction was that actually they don't know what's happening out there. This is very important because if they don't know what's happening out there, it's very difficult to shape and govern anything. So the knowledge about what's going on there is very, very weak. Now my perspective on digitalization, a bit from a sustainability perspective. My first thing, and there I would start agreeing with you. When we assessed the whole literature on digitalization from the background and perspective of how a global economy with 9 billion people in 2050 might look like within planetary boundaries. So this is about ecosystems and their boundaries, this is about climate change, this is about running out of resources in different areas, etc., etc. And we looked at digitalization and could these kind of technologies help us? And the first assessment is that if you would use these technologies well, they might help us. In many fields, decarbonization, circular economy, resource efficiency gains, monitoring and stabilizing ecosystems, these technologies might allow us disruptive change towards sustainability. Also, of course, exactly the opposite might happen because, as you said, technologies might be used for good and bad, but the potential to use these kind of technologies for stabilizing the Earth systems are obviously there from our perspective. My second point is then, what are the characteristics, this was, Klaus, your second question, the characteristics of the digital age. And we are moving currently still, we have not yet finished, we are still moving through the whole literature trying to understand what's going out there. And the major impression is that a completely different kind of age is emerging. Let's call it for a second the digital age. And as you very well explained, the digital is not a sector or something. The digital is impacting everything, our societies, our economies, the individuals, and the planet itself. So it is really transformative. And I think that we will have, after having moved through all these literature, as the German Advisory Council on Global Change, we will now advocate for a completely different and much more far-reaching sustainability discourse in the context of the digital age. And we see 4 characteristics there of the digital age. This is where we stand currently. And those characteristics show and demonstrate that the difference between the market economies and the industrial age, where we are coming from, and the digital age will be as big as the huge shifts from the rural societies and the industrial societies. So I think we need to imagine how a peasant living in 1750 might have looked or imagined how an industrialized world might look like. It would have been very difficult for him to imagine these kind of shifts. The shifts we are confronted with are as big as those kind of transformations. So here are the 4 characteristics of the digital age. This is where we stand currently. The first thing is that we are now transmitting cognitive capabilities to technical systems, large scale. And this is important from different perspectives. First, in the past we thought that cognitive capacities, this is something where humans are good at, this has been our advantage compared with all our species. We are good in cognitive issues, now we are transmitting this to technical systems. This will have huge implications for labor markets and therefore for inequality, for justice, for tax revenues, for social systems, because all the economic studies which we are having on the table are demonstrating that something between 15 to 80% of the jobs which we know nowadays will disappear and will be substituted. Not during the next 18 months, but the potential is huge. So we will have completely different labor markets. We need completely different social security systems. This is one dimension. The other dimension has been touched upon by you also. As we now do invest in technical systems with cognitive capabilities, artificial intelligence, the question is coming up during the last month or 2 years or something like that, that maybe these technical systems make better decisions than humans do. You touched upon this issue. No? We do have debates about that. So where is the competitive advantages of parliaments compared with technical systems? No? You might have read in the newspapers today, Süddeutsche Zeitung. No? You all know the game Go. No? And until only 18 months ago, no computer program has been able to beat humans in this game because it's very complex. It has also to do with intuition. It's not only rationality, it's intuition. No? So 18 months ago, only 18 months ago, the first program has been invented which has been beaten the most capable Go player on the planet. No? Only 6-4 in the first round. In the second round, 10-0. So the technical system won. No? Now we have, you can read this in the newspaper today, Süddeutsche Zeitung, we have this this Go program, second, 2.0. No? It's called Go Zero or something like that. And this second generation of program has been beaten the first generation of this kind of program only 18 months ago, 100-0. No, so the exponential curve of learning systems and transmitting cognitive capabilities to technological systems is huge. And this is not only related to labor markets and social security systems, it's related to who is deciding upon societal questions in the future. No? Are we losing control? What's democracy about under these conditions? Legitimacy. So the Schmidt question, I would not argue this way, but the question is completely congruent with the technical dynamics which we are observing. This is the first characteristic. The second characteristic is the virtual world. No? Some of you might still remember Rosa Luxemburg. No? Rosa Luxemburg, she thought about colonialization, arguing that now market economies, she called it capitalism. No? Capitalism is conquering the last white spaces on earth, colonialization. No? Now we are creating new spaces. We are creating virtual spaces, no? For good and for bad. I will give you a very anecdotal evidence to that. I have been in New York 2 weeks ago. We had a conference with Google people. So it was with a sidewalk group working on smart cities. No? Virtual world. They demonstrated to us how far the technology is moving forward now. We entered in a room, 3 steps. No? So they are currently planning a new city. They would like to build. They are building a city during the next 2-3 years for 18,000 people, thinking it very systematically from the perspective of digital infrastructures of any kind. No? So not improving something from scratch. No? They would like to demonstrate a pilot city, how it might look like. So we entered in a room, and the first step was a wonderful movie, high density, etc., etc. So we felt as if we were in the city, which is still not existing. No? This was impressive, but we all know that, of course. Then we got these glasses, which you also know. This, how do you call this? Three-dimensional VR glasses. Yeah, these kind of glasses, no, and the devices to move individually into virtual rooms, no. This was a second step. So we have been a group of 30 people, and individually we moved into different parts of the city, which is still not existing. No? So for me it was very impressive. So I went to the southern part of the not existing city, moving into one of these buildings and moving up into the building. No? And it was very near to the real world we know. No? Then we got a third step, and we got gloves. No? Glass with sensors. And the idea was very simple. And now in the virtual room of a still not existing city, I could touch the walls and persons which are moving around, have been moving around there, which are also virtual avatars, not existing creatures. And it was very real. No? So this is the virtual room, which is emerging, for good and for bad. I mean, for good, we could imagine that in the future, all of us could meet transnational communities, no, and communicate with anyone else on Earth, creating basic conditions for global cooperation. No? So we can imagine fantastic things. We need to think about it, how to use this. No? We could imagine to visit the future, to visit different futures. It might help us to manage better policies with very, very long-term implications. No? But we also could, you also talked about that, could imagine that in this kind of worlds, humans might degrade. So how are we getting prepared to live parts of our life in these kind of worlds? No? Second characteristic. The third characteristic has also mentioned by the two speakers already. It's about the transformation of humans themselves. So this is a combination of digital technologies and devices and infrastructures and neurosciences, cognitive sciences. It's about our brain. No? And transformation of humans. Human enhancement. No? It starts also with actually things which we all would find fantastic. Fighting health issues, no? fighting Alzheimer, for example. No? Huge progresses are currently being made. We could imagine how to get a better sense of concentration, how to learn faster. No? We are starting to intervene in our brain and manipulating it and learning faster. No? In the future, learning 10 languages might be very easy. No? Not only Emmanuel might manage 10 languages, but all of us, because we might have a USB connection and we can download language issues. So this sounds very silly, but the research programs are there. In the United States, the same infrastructure who has been inventing the internet is now working on a huge program which is called Programming Human Brains. No? For good and bad. No? You can also program brains for creating warriors, for example. But you also could argue that we are bringing down aggression levels in our brains. No? But what I'm saying is, for good and bad, the new thing is that we have been learning in our kind of communist class that humans became the driving forces to change the Earth system. We are driving the Earth system. We are transforming the Earth system. Now we are starting to transform ourselves. No? And the question is, are we prepared for that? How can we get prepared for that? Because it is moving forward already. This is the third characteristic. And then the fourth characteristic is a combination of the first one, which I mentioned already, and connectivity. And connecting all these different technical infrastructures, both of you talked about that. No? So in my 2-3 days there in New York with the Google people, I listened again and again to a term which I at the beginning did not understand. No? They talked about technical civilizations. No? And then I started to understand that what they wanted to say is that in the past we had technical infrastructures. No, technical infrastructures are technical systems which are limited by our algorithms. No? At the end of the day, humans decided, I'm talking in the past, no? Humans decided what these kind of machines are able to do. No? So the limitations have been defined by the algorithm, but now our algorithms are teaching these kind of machines how to move beyond the algorithms themselves. So we are not any longer limiting this is what artificial intelligence is about. No? And when you are connecting now many of these technical systems, connectivity, something like a technical civilization is emerging, which we might control by 10%, by 15%, by 50%, we don't know. The Google people and this community which we are working with now to understand what the digital age is about, they call this a technical civilization. The idea is that this is a semi-autonomous or autonomous infrastructure which we are coexisting then with. This is also something which is completely new and different from everything which we have been talking about before. And now my last sentence is, with many experts, we have been asking the question, okay, there are obviously incredible opportunities and chances here, but also incredible challenges, normative ones, social ones, economic ones, whatever. So it's about governance. No? It's about what kind of system would we like to see? No? What kind of society would we like to build? No? So how much time do we have to shape and govern these dynamics before irreversible trends are building path dependencies, which we then cannot any longer really shape? No? And the positive answer was 20 years. So during the next 20 years, we have time in our societies, first to understand what's going on, and then trying to shape where we would like to go to. So that is the window of opportunity, 20 years. This is the optimistic answer. The more skeptical answer was 5 years. No? 5 years. And I don't know exactly, because even the specialists in these different rounds of discussions which we had don't converge on that. But even the optimistic version implies that we need to start urgently to have big debates in our societies about these kind of dynamics, because this is still a complete, closed, expert discussion with no links to our societies and to our governments. No? As I said, I'm coming out of a governmental meeting last day, and I was confronted with the responsible people of digital futures in our ministries, and their answer was that we do not have these kind of things under control. No? So there are some challenges which we need to think about.
Thank you very much, Dirk and Constanze. So this brings us back to your argument about the faculty of judgment, I guess. If you say for good or for bad, this is exactly what it's about, and what are the criteria of judgment then? Would you like to react to the two interventions? And then,
yes. I mean, many things were said now, many interesting things to which I would like to react more in detail. But since we're not going to spend the entire night here, I guess I'll just respond by restating maybe something that was important to me, because I'm not sure I was able to fully express it to the extent of clarity I would have liked, and that is. It's not the algorithm that is the problem here. So when I talk about Silicon Valley ideology, I'm not incriminating the algorithm as such. I'm incriminating a certain way of talking about the algorithm as if the algorithm and the specific uses it induces were natural and they were without alternatives. So the algorithm is not technology at large. So what we're doing here, and this is, I'm already answering your question about judgment, is to see a kind of disjunction, the disjunction between efficiency and meaning that we might find extremely helpful for a number of things. I don't want that in all cases, all the parameters are taken into account. When I go and see my physician, I don't want the physician to see me as a full-fledged person with all my spiritual needs. I just need the physician to tell me whether I have whether my bones are broken or not. I don't want to be taken into account as a total being. So that may be fine to be broken down into specific, discrete parts. The problem here is when we present it as natural, as a natural disjunction between this procedure and the question of meaning. I've expressed this in different ways: form and content, semantics and syntax, medium and message. So I think we're witnessing a system which tags in what you described, which is presented as an operation that negates itself as an operation. There's an ideology of seamlessness where we're told we can communicate via Skype with all parts of the world. There is interoperability between the systems. Everything can connect with everything. Everything can connect with everything, and we're not dependent on technology to do that. And that's where I see the problem, because if we say for good and for bad, okay, that might be fine in a descriptive way, but we're giving up something that we call meaning. And traditionally, cognition had to do with questions of meaning. Now, the transfer of cognition is not just a transfer from human to machine, it's a transformation of the very notion of cognition to something that we call information. And it's a specific form of cognition that is to leave aside the question of judgment. We don't know what it is made for, and we even ask people to work in such a way that they don't know what it is about. I have a friend who runs a publishing house in France, and she had the problem that she had old books that were published 20 years ago, and she doesn't have an electronic version of those books. So what does she do? She sends these books to China, and in China, 3 people copy the books, you know, like the medieval typists. And they're then compared, and if there's any difference between the 3 typed versions, then she has to correct it. So the point is that these Chinese typists, they're not meant to know anything about the content of the book, because if you know the content of the book, you're going to anticipate the error and correct it immediately. So that's exactly the kind of redundancy that we asked the algorithm to do, is that it works the better, the little or the less the system knows about the content. And I think it's this kind of disjunction which is problematic when it is presented as a natural continuity. That's what I try to present here. And I think judgment is only necessary in cases where things could be different. So judgment intervenes where situations have to be decided because they're not natural. We don't need to decide about natural laws. We only decide about where we need to create human laws. And we're having a lawyer sitting here who's, I think, not going to contradict me. So to cut a long answer short, I think we need to come back to the question, where could things be different? And I think they can be different on many different levels. We need to fight the ideology of naturalization.
Mm-hmm. Actually, these are very important questions. First, you said that, but maybe there is a misunderstanding. This is not about the technology. This is about the meaning of technology. And any technology can have different meanings. Some technologies are bad and need to be regulated, others are not. Like nuclear energy actually has meaning. You see, it doesn't bring the same abilities, capabilities, it doesn't bring up the same society as solar energy. So when we talk about digital technologies, they have meanings, and there are different technologies and different ways to use them that will bring different societies. It's not the same thing to rely on a proprietary, equity-based company to exchange messages among ourselves and to send texts or phone calls through a public service. It's different. And so it's not because we have new technologies that we need to change everything all the time and accept what is being presented to us at face value. I was really amused when you talked about the Google Pilot City. You know who did that before? Well, I think every industrialist in the past actually created a pilot city. Fordlandia in Brazil. We have a Brazilian here. Do you know about Fordlandia? Well, it brings laughs today. But at the time, it was hailed as the future of humanity and the vision of a man who knew how new society should be. Now we know what it is. And when you see, I was surprised, like, I wrote a little piece about that, but selling old stuff as new, I insisted on that. These technologies are not new, they're old. They've been invented in the 50s. And they are just being presented as new, but it's not. When you look at Mark Zuckerberg, okay, he's trying to run for president. He's making a pre-run, if you want. And I was interested. It's so sad. I don't have it, but you can look on Google, actually, or if you prefer, you can look on DuckDuckGo, on Quant. You can look on. You have many other search engines. We only use Google in Europe because we don't know better, and because the European institutions don't care about actually trying to promote other search engines. But still,
And so he went up for dinner with citizens in Ohio, I think. And he took a picture. And really, it's really impressive to look at. So try to look at the old school politics of Mark Zuckerberg. It's an article I've wrote. And you will see the picture. The picture is exactly the same in composition, everything, than the picture of Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, then candidate for presidency in France in 1972, I think. Three. Yeah, in black and white on the left, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. In color on the right, Mark Zuckerberg. What's new? Nothing. And that's striking me as a problem. More than actually the technology in itself. I have no trouble with technology at all. Then there is one thing. You said, are we prepared? Are we prepared? How can people ask a question like that? The question is not, are we prepared? If we don't want these changes to happen, they won't. They could have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. They did not. As of today, and I think it's really funny to see it like that, Google hails itself as able to describe what would be a tech civilization, but as of today, they have failed at doing anything else than selling ads. They have not disrupted the health sector. They have not disrupted the education sector. They have not disrupted most of that. They are just an ad-selling company. And they provide services because it brings a lot of money and they can do other stuff. And it's good. And they are trying to think and all that. And then there is one question which is very important to me. Would you discuss the future of our society with Monsanto? Yeah. Would you discuss the future of agriculture with Monsanto? I'm not so sure. Of course, they will sell you the way we will bring better food to more people for a cheaper price. And it will be such a good quality food. It will be incredible. But you know what kind of debate this brings. And it goes way further than the efficiency of producing food or not. That's the trouble we have today. Well, I think.
I think we should now, okay, it's allowed to come. I think we should now open the floor to you because we don't have more than 20 minutes, I guess, for discussion, and you should, particularly, my suggestion is focus on one point. What is, where are the possibilities of European public sphere? We haven't touched upon that until now. So who will speak first? There was one hand raised, there's another. Yes, there's this fantastic row number 4 or so, maybe. And please, short questions, no longer comments, so everybody can raise his voice.
This question is for both of the speakers, but probably more for Jean-Baptiste. And in general, if it's exact to the discussion, you have a lot of good criticism of Silicon Valley ideology, as far as I understand. My question is, why do you think, and what makes you think that something based on Europe and European values is better? Mm-hmm. And I agree with your criticism.
Maybe you can pass the mic to the next question, and we gather some questions and you answer them.
Yes, so I agree with your criticism too. And my sort of like comment or a question was like, do you think that this digital revolution or whatever is much different from like other revolutions that occurred in the past, like the printing invention or like radio or like TV? So to my feeling, I think it's about the same, and maybe like the role of the state is just to regulate it, to provide institutions and to regulate the access and rules of operation. But to me, it seems it's not much different. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Maybe one more question.
Just a very short one. Maybe to all of you or whoever would like to respond. Whether it is an accident or not, whether it is by accident or not, that you, almost all of you, avoided the notion politics. Because when I hear about the ideology of neutrality or ideology of naturality, of, in this case, some technology, when I think about the notion that would be the opposite one, it would be politics. And this is also why I think that this is not about the governance that we need in this period between, roughly speaking, 5 or 20 years. This is about politics. This is about struggle of who is in charge and who is in control over these technologies. Governance sounds technocratic, sounds that we have some objective way to know what is it all about, and then to introduce some objectively adequate means and instruments for that. I think it's not about the governance. It is about political struggle between different actors who can be in charge. Some of them democratic, some of them not necessarily. And this is not a coincidence that Eric Schmidt said about the parliaments and about the Facebook. It was not just an opinion or an idea which is true or not. This was a political statement, what Eric Schmidt said.
Thank you. Maybe we start here for the first round, Dirk.
Yeah, maybe the last question. I agree with you. Governance sounds technocratic. That's fine. I take this point. What we need to ask is who is controlling what. It's about interests, no? And who has the power to change things. No? And then the next question is what kind of futures would we like to see? No, and what kind of norms would we like to emphasize, which these kind of technologies then needs to be compatible with? No? This also implies that we need to ask the question, where would we not like to move into? Which kind of field? No? And if we think about programming brains, these are very fundamental shifts. Who is controlling that? How far would we like to go? And these are very difficult normative questions. No? So I agree with you. This is about politics. But as we know so little about it in our societies, it's not an easy task. Now, as I said, I'm a sustainability researcher. So we do the kind of debates about implementing the Paris Agreement, no? Implementing the 2030 agenda. What I can tell you is that this community has no link, or very, very few links. There are very, very few bridges to your kind of discussions about the digital futures. And if we don't bring these kind of debates together about how our futures needed to look like, this is sustainability issues and Paris and the 2030 agenda, if we don't link this debate with these kind of fundamental shifts in our technological spheres, we don't get things right. No? Therefore, I agree with your point.
I don't know, maybe I'm sitting in the wrong place because I disagree completely with almost everything, first of all. I'm trying really to focus, right. I disagree with that gap because I attended the Enquete-Kommission in the German Bundestag, and this is 4 years ago now. And these questions are addressed even in the parliament. And we have a lot of commissions, not only in the German sphere, but also in many European countries who talk about the ethics. It's also our national ethics commission talking about that. So that's not true. Maybe it is true that if you are in a Google, Facebook, or Amazon, Microsoft sales exhibition, then maybe they don't want to understand what kind of academic discussions or political discussions are there. Second point, the judgment thing. You also said that in your talk. The reality today is that machines, and I avoid these rather bizarre algorithm word, machines and software are making decisions, and not only decisions, also judgments today about you and me, and they can do it in a lot of realms better than we can because of our limitations as human beings, and that is also semantic. The question for me is always, who decides about those softwares? Who is the one giving that machine or computer the power? And that is just the reason I think your statement that judgment can't be done by machines is of course wrong, because it's already done, and it will be larger, of course. And to remarks you may, I think there are certain facts about technology and also about the history of computer science, which is well known and does not concur with what you said.
Okay, so few short things. The first one is that, of course, the real issue about the decision-making process is that if we live in democratic societies, we consider that one of the defining features of democracies is that those who are affected by decisions have a word to say about the decision-making process. And this is exactly what is being undermined when the instances of the decision-making process are not accessible any longer. So when we're talking about predictive justice, for example, who is going to take that decision? Because we're not only talking about synchronic decisions, we're talking about long-term diachronic decisions. For example, the very possibility of someone being incarcerated by preventive justice because potentially he might become a terrorist once he's a grown-up because of certain features we've discovered in his brain or whatever. So certainly if this is what we call by judgment, maybe we have a problem here because at least this is very far from what traditionally, at least in the discipline I come from, philosophy, we call the capacity of the use of judgment. The second thing concerns the question of this private and public issue. So why is this distinction important? Because what is public is something that doesn't belong to someone in particular. And what we're seeing, of course, there are many European initiatives. We haven't talked much about this, and I left this out in the longer version of my paper, talk about this. So we have initiatives such as Europeana, this wonderful project of a European Library of Alexandria, so to speak, digital-wise, which is the attempt of not saying just we have Google Books and they're digitizing what Europe has produced in the past 500 years, but we have to develop something else with very interesting model, which is called EDM, European Data Model, which wants to say we have different standards of knowledge in the different fields, but we have to create interoperability. So data, of course, allows this, and there are European initiatives that we have to talk about. The criticism, of course, is to believe that we can have something like an overarching model that could integrate all of that and that does disregard the specificities of the contexts and the difference, for example, in terms of languages. There might be use for us all to speak English here, but very few of us are native English speakers, and it comes at a cost when there is a difference here between native speakers and those who are not speaking English. So there is a reason why we use English as a lingua franca, but it comes at a price, and that's what we need to stress. Who pays the price? Who pays the price? I believe, and Philippe van Parijs, the Belgian theorist, says, well, English-speaking countries should come up for the expenses for the other nations to learn English in a proper way because they have a native advantage. Maybe the idea is not so stupid. Fourth point I want to mention, when we talk about these public-private partnerships, we have to ask the question, and thank you for the last question of our Polish friend here, what's the politics behind this? Jean-Baptiste talked of a Silicon Valley project. I talked of ideology. So all of this is not banal, it's not neutral. I'm referring to a certain number of choices that are being made here. Not for nothing, most of the Silicon Valley companies and their CEOs are strongly democratic. They're not pro-Trump, these kind of things. They're often social democrats. And I would be surprised, we'd think they should be total liberals, that they should be on this, in the European sense of the term. They're not. Why is that? Because it's in their interest. Right now, we're seeing a vast number of municipalities in California that are using taxpayers' money to fund Uber rides, because it's actually cheaper to use Uber to provide transportation means for elderly people, but also for school kids, than to invest into public transportation. So on the long run, of course, this means that public investments will fall short. We won't have infrastructure, transportation infrastructure any longer in the name of efficiency and of the service of the public goods, that is the service of individuals. And this is what I'm referring to. There is a politics that consists in the very fact that it denies that it is a politics. And this is ultimately can be traced down to the idea of the disjunction between the platform and what takes place on that platform.
Yeah.
We have 3 questions. Maybe who would like to ask a question? We have time for 3 questions. Here's number 1. Is there one more question? Number 2. Okay. Number 3. Okay. Then we have, unfortunately, to finish because of time reasons. Please go. Very brief.
I will be very short. You asked if the EU was able to give a better model. Well, it's already there, partly. As I said, I'm not against technology. Free software is everywhere. Free software is being developed in Europe mainly. Wikipedia is written everywhere in the world at the same time. And we have open standards. We have people working together, companies and governments and researchers working together in order to provide telecommunication infrastructure and technologies. And it works. They're exchanging patent stuff all the time. They discover new stuff. So we have a different model. The thing is that we don't see technology in Europe as a political project. That's the thing. Why? Because, and this is a little bit what you said, and it answers what you mean by your question, I think, because we don't want to drive an assault on representative democracy. The thing is that, who's in charge? Well, we are in charge as of today. Just last week, an algorithm was forbidden in France. In high schools, people who go to high schools after the Abitur, the French Abitur, their place in universities was being decided for the last 2 years by an algorithm. And last year, we had a lot of problems. And actually, the French courts used the law from 1978, the law on privacy, the same there is in Germany, and the same that inspired the directive. You know what the Article 2 of that law said in 1978? It said that no automated decision could be taken that could have effects on the life of a human without its consent. It's super simple. It's just like you cannot apply an algorithm to someone if he doesn't know that it's being done. And as of today, you have algorithms taking decisions for all of your lives, all the time. Even like your salary is being decided by an algorithm somewhere in your company. It's just automatic.
Okay, let's stop here and have 3 more questions. Please start.
Thank you, Lucy Campos. I don't want this to sound negative because I really enjoyed each and every one of your presentations. The question is very simple: what is new? I have the impression we've been going round and round with this debate for at least 5 years, if not many more. No hierarchy of information, no judgment, the need for editorialization, competing for epistemological authority. The digital is not a sector, it impacts everything. The question of democracy, these questions have been going for a long time. What's new?
I would also like to connect the public sphere discussion, which has been cut a bit short among you, with the political question before. So just a very quick analogy. The democracy system, as we know it, builds on the division of power, and you have in almost all national democracies a word for what the public sphere does in that system. It is, in English, the fourth estate, in German, vierte Staatsgewalt, and so on, which means that it's a part of, it's an integral, central part, it's a pillar of the democratic system. And if that democratic system transfers itself from a national context onto a transnational scene, something happens to that system. Between 70 and 80% of legislations and so on are no longer taken on the national level, it's taken on the transnational level. And if that fourth pillar of that democratic system doesn't move along, but stands still in that national context, is it, and that is a fact, and if we then give up the Habermasian model, not only as an idealist model, but also as a normative model, then it's not only the public sphere that we're talking about as changing or whatever. We're talking about that we have a completely new democratic system, which means that it becomes less interesting actually talking about the public sphere and more interesting talking about politics, if we accept that. And the question is, do we?
Okay, and last question, please.
Thank you, and it's really connected to the both. So it's just adding a little bit to her. Is this idea that it's been going for 5 years, and I think like, how different it is from what's going on in the discussion of the philosophy of science, the 150 years, with these visions of the future, and are we facing a different challenge than Venice or Wells when they try to look in the future and seeing like utopian and dystopian evolutions from that? And the other one, it's really like about that, it's about the power, like do we have the power over that? Because the feeling is that like, it's this unstoppable evolution, but should it be or not?
Thank you. So there were a couple of terms related to Europe, which is the public sector. The social democratic idea was not to give a public sector, but to strengthen it originally, because he said they are all social democrats. The other one is democracy and the division of power, etc. And then, of course, the fourth pillar, the media in general. So maybe very brief answers to that, because we really have only 4 or 5 minutes, and we need to stop here for all kind of reasons. 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute.
Well, your question is super good. As I said, it has not even been going on for 12 years. It has been going on since 1920, the eugenist movement, everything like that. The thing is, it's crystallizing now, and I think we see more clearly the impact, especially when it comes to sexual harassment, these kind of things, and so on. We did not have that information before, and it's beginning to emerge, so we better understand, that's it. And it's already a big thing, I think, and it's only that.
Very short. There is no politics without technology. That's to begin with. There is, and we cannot separate the two. The sphere of appearance is the sphere that is organized, structuralized, has an infrastructure, and this infrastructure is technical. What is new is that there's a difference in the technology itself. That's the question. It's a difference between printing press and so the printing press is digital, of course, in the sense that it uses structurally standardized, disjunctive, a finite set of elements in order to encode something that is infinite, so continuous. So the digital is, of course, neither born in the 50s nor in the 1920s. It's any technique that applies a finite discretization to something that is infinite, okay? So, but what is new is that there is a machine that has been invented that can apply this discretization to anything. That's the equality thing. So the printing press cannot be applied to every and each thing. The universal calculating machine that Turing devised is this change. So that's why equality is so important. And third, last element is that of contingency. We don't have to think that the universal calculating machine is a totalitarian model. On the contrary, it's when we take into account the possibility of potentially encoding everything that at the same time we discover the contingency of the very code that is applied here. There is no natural need to apply a discrete code to all these possible objects, and if we realize that the universal thing and the contingency aspect come together, then we have the opening up of other possibilities of behaving, of thinking, and maybe even of calculating.
Thank you.
I just have a minute and want to point to another technological change, which is about to happen right now, which we see in the next 1 or 2 years, and that applies to your question with the public fear and the way we perceive news, how we change our opinions and stuff like that. I guess everybody, since the Trump election and the last European election, saw that public spaces like Facebook have gained importance in a lot of countries. But what we see now is that we approach computer in a different kind, and that is what is called voice commands, and the tech concerns, companies say they talk about voice shopping, of course, and it's processing of human voices and literally understanding orders which human give, and I think that will be for the discussion in a European realm, maybe very important if you have a real-time translation in it. I saw the prototype from Microsoft a year ago, where they show, it's kind of Star Trek, like the Universal Translator, where they have a translation of voice commands in real time into your ear. They have a setting of, I don't know, 4 persons speaking 4 languages, and you have something in your ear. And the interesting though was that it was not so tactical, it was it's semantic processing involved in it. And I think that will be for the public opinion in Europe, will be quite interesting if it's deployed on a larger scale and goes out of the labs. Of course, it was invented in the 30s or something. But okay, that's just the technological advancement which I think will form.
I wanted to pick up again the question, what's new there? This was your issue, and then the power question. So for me there are 3 new things. The first is that I think we need deep discussions about the dignity of humans. So if we talk about programming other people's or people's brains, this is about a normative challenge, and dignity needs to be put at the center. The second thing is, I think it's new that we are, and there we seem to agree, we are handing over more and more decision-making processes to machines. I mean, this makes a huge difference, and this might transform our democracies, this might transform the way we work together in companies, the way we take decisions in our private lives. So handing over decisions to systems is the second element. The third element is that my hypothesis would be that our institutions and our governance structures are not prepared to shape this process. No? Not at all. We are not even able to tax companies. No? And this has to do with these new kind of virtual rooms. It's very difficult to really see where value added is being created and could be taxed. So we are losing control regarding taxing. This is about public goods of any kind, because we need to finance things. No? Then last week we had a colleague in our group to discuss about last advances when it came again to the brain issue. No? And he's the Max Planck director in Munich, no? Brain scientist, neurologist. And he argued that the technologies to manipulate from the outside via Bluetooth mechanisms, no? The perception of human beings is already there. So who is controlling that? No? So, and we would not even feel and realize that there's something like this is going on. So who is taking control of that? And my last point is then the interaction between the sustainability people and well-being people and climate and so on, the SDGs, the 2030 agenda, and the digital. No? I mean, look into the SDGs. No? 17 goals and 116 sub-goals. No? 116, 69 exactly. Do you know how many relate to any kind of digital issues? One. And this is access to digital services. This is everything. I mean, imagine what we discussed tonight. No? The impacts of our labor market, to our labor markets, to equity, to dignity, to democracy, to everything which is into this agenda, but the link is zero. And my last point is the development ministry. No? I mean, they needed to think about these kind of issues, initiating modernization progress and democracy progresses around the world. Do you know how many people are being responsible for digital issues? 0.75 persons. No? 0.75 persons. Nothing to add.
That was a very optimistic notion in the end. We have to do a lot of things, 2 things to end, no 3. One is, many thanks for your presentations and many thanks for your do this, we have everything on this board. Lara has done a great job as far as I can see from here. So this is taken, and we can use it in our further debates because we have not ended. And now you have to go very quickly to the bus.